Welcome back to the Untaming Masculinity podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dan, and I am joined by my co-host, Brad. Brad, today is a special episode because not only is it our 10th episode, but it is our first interview episode. We are joined by our good friend, David Body. First of all, Brad, how's it going with you?
I'm good. It was a battle getting my kids in bed at night. There are some nights where, so my wife works the night that we record podcasts, and so when I'm putting my kids down, they get so riled up. Today was daughter smashed my son's foot. There were tears. There's him dragging his foot like he was a lame child for a while. There were toys getting thrown about. It was a good time. So I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. I just got back from a business dinner, so it was definitely a different night than you've had. Let's say that.
You need to elaborate on your hoity-toity experience.
We did. We went to a very a fancy kind of upscale place. It was one of those places where you walk in and you don't know what's on the menu. It's a five course menu with a wine pairing, so that was very nice. And enjoyed the time. My boss's boss is in from Germany this week, so it was a nice time to get all the management together and kind of just spend some time together talking business and personal. So it was good.
Oh, we would be remiss if we didn't ask David what he had for dinner. I know we haven't introduced you yet, but this is a great segue into the man, the myth, and the legend.
Thanks for having me on, guys. This is awesome. It's so cool to see you guys progress from this being an idea and a vision and something you guys were just kind of talking about from a dream perspective to now here you are, and I'm listening to your episodes and getting a lot of good stuff out of it. So it's really cool to be on with you guys. For dinner tonight, I smoked a tri-tip. So wife made some veggies, not quite the 5-course extravaganza, I guess I'll say, but it was really good. Yes. Been playing around with my new pit boss.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah,
I've been eyeing one of those, so that's nice. So
that's great machine.
Why don't we start the episode with, David, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is David Body?
Who is David Body? So again, my name is David Body. I am married. I think that's married for almost 15 years, almost 16 years. That's bad. My wife's going to listen to this and get me for that. So 16 years, I've got 3 kids, grew up in a lot of sports and stuff, and grew out in the country in Washington State, grew up near the base of Mount Rainier, ultimately got into tree work. So I spent most of my life logging and doing tree work and things like that. And really enjoyed that, working with my hands, being outdoors, working hard, taught me a lot. Ended up joining the military later on in life. I'm in the Army National Guard, was an infantryman, and ultimately in a sniper section. And then since then have moved to Montana, good old free state of Montana. Love it here, and swapped over to a different MOS. So now I'm an Intel analyst here in Montana, and have since also become full-time working for Operation Restored Warrior, which is a nonprofit that works with veterans that are struggling with suicide ideation, loss of purpose, etc. And for them, I run their social media and podcasts. Just started a podcast for them. And then also work as a facilitator. So we run programs every month. And so I go in and I'm part of that team that works with the guys every month. So I'm sure we'll talk some more about that. But it's me in a nutshell. Love the outdoors, getting into hunting just like you, Dan. I'm a late bloomer in the hunting realm. And great state to live in for that as well.
Adult onset hunting.
Yes.
Is what I've heard referred to as. Yes.
Yeah, I didn't grow up doing that. My dad grew up in the city and wasn't into a lot of stuff like that, fishing, hunting. So my buddies did it. I did a little bit of fishing with some buddies growing up, but I never hunted. And so it's really been later on in life that I realized, like, man, this is something I want to do. And then I want to do it with my son. My oldest is a boy, 14. And so that's something now I'm like, man, I really want to get into that. And I have no excuse now that I live in Montana. There's just so much good hunting around me. And so, just trying to get into that, and we'll see how it goes.
I think Brad's the same way as me, but I grew up quite the same way. I grew up on a lake, so fishing was a big part of my life growing up. But hunting was just something that other people did, right? It just wasn't part of my life. And all of a sudden, I got the bug met a bunch of guys locally on Long Island of all places, and I'm really bitten by it. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I guess we should probably talk about how we met.
All right, who's going to tell the tale of how we all met? Don't all volunteer at once.
So there was a time years ago when I was a lonely man struggling with many, many issues in my life. I think that's a good way to preface. Picture Star Wars, long time ago. I was a struggling man. I had a lot of issues going on in my marriage and just really ultimately looking for accountability. So I joined the Iron Council after listening to the Order of Man podcast for a season, probably a couple of years. Joined with a different battle team initially, and then after some time started looking for another one and found Romulus, and that was my home. Just an amazing, incredible battle team at the time. Dan was the XO, Cam was the battle team leader, and so we've been in this journey together now with Romulus, and ultimately, I can't even imagine not being on this team and in the Iron Council now. So that is how we all met, on Battle Team Romulus, the Iron Council.
David and I actually met prior to that. So the Iron Council occasionally have these calls where it's a big Friday call, a bunch of guys in the whole group get together. These calls can range from 100 to 200 guys. And they did breakout rooms via Zoom. And I was sent off to this breakout room with this guy. He's like, oh, David Body. And he started talking. I was like, this guy and I have some things in common. He's a pretty interesting fella. I'd like to get to know him. He seems really cool. And then it was 2 or 3 months later, he shows up on one of our Romulus calls. It's like, hey, I know this guy. So,
I remember that very clearly. I remember being really struck by you. Smitten.
Yeah, there we go.
You had a lot of good things to say. I will also remind you that was back in the day when your camera was down here. So it was like looking up
at his nose.
Yeah.
I have a secret for you. It still is. My camera's right here. It just if I type, I have to be like this. Thanks. I'm sure
all of our YouTube video.
Yeah.
Hey, it's gonna be the highlight of the YouTube video.
Yeah. Glorious close up of his beard.
My laptop has the camera at the bottom of the monitor. It's bizarre.
That is so weird.
Thanks, Del.
Very weird. Mm-hmm. Anyways, Brad and I did an episode recently about the power of service, and we've been talking a lot about getting, starting to do interviews on the podcast and stuff like that. And your name obviously was on our short list to begin with, based on our relationship with you. But when we did the Power of Service podcast, we were talking and we said, this is a perfect episode for David to kind of piggyback on because of the work that he does with ORW, just kind of his life in general. And we kind of wanted to get you on and to talk about this and to discuss, the effect of service, or the effect that service has had in your life, both professionally with ORW and in your military service, and then I know you're a very religious guy as well. So that's kind of where we want to take the conversation. Maybe you could start with telling us a little bit about ORW and what they do. Yeah. And then we can talk, we can bring it back to you, personally as well.
Yeah. That's a great topic. And I did love your episode on that. Service is so crucial. If you think about it, so many guys grow up with this desire just deep inside them to be in the military, to serve their country. And that's kind of on maybe a 30,000 foot scale. That's one of the things we can really relate to quickly, is serving your country, serving your community in law enforcement. And Operation Restored Warrior was formed about 13 years ago with the idea of, after years of combat, we started recognizing that our servicemen were going over to Iraq, going over to Afghanistan, and coming back with all kinds of issues: PTSD, depression, loss of purpose at a bare minimum. And suicide ideation was, the rate of suicide typically has been running between 20 and 24 per day for years now amongst service members, and specifically combat veterans. The worst is where you see it the worst. And so ORW was formed specifically to engage those guys, and men and women, that are coming back and not knowing what to do. Because the reality is, You go and you experience trauma, you experience all kinds of difficult things. And, number one, as a man, you engage service, for example. You're fired up. You want to get out there. You want to do your job. You want to fight for your country. And it's kind of this bravado in it, especially you start getting into more and more elite levels of the military. You don't want to admit that you have issues. You don't want to admit that there's something wrong. You got to kind of carry on this facade that everything's fine. I'm good to go. You may even get pulled from the team you're on if you're experiencing a lot of issues. So what we recognize is those guys need a safe place to be able to unload the stuff that they've been going through throughout their life, for one, but then specifically in combat, etc. And so what we do is we bring guys in. We do a 5-day program called a drop zone, and we meet in different locations throughout the country. Some of them are like ranch at 9,000 feet in Colorado. It's awesome. We got another place out on the coast in Maryland on the water, but it's scenic. It's beautiful. There's something that speaks to guys, and we basically have them focus on their heart, which is something that I think most of us can say there's never been a time in our lives where we stepped aside, spent 5 days focusing on our own heart. Because the problem is when we're so focused on service, we tend to be so focused on outward, what we're doing for others, we forget to take care of ourselves. And so we've been stuffing all kinds of stuff for years and years and years. And so what we do is we basically bring those guys in and walk them through a process of understanding kind of who they are as men, how they were created. Some of that is that DNA, like we're made to serve, to be a warrior and fight battles. But then to dig in more into how do we get where we are now, like at the point that they're walking in there where they're feeling beat up, they're feeling that loss of motivation, they're feeling that maybe even not even wanting to live. And then we are a biblically based program. So we then basically bring Jesus into the picture and invite them into a deep healing experience. And then we kind of say it like they come in at 30,000 feet and we kind of lower down to a couple of days in where we're at ground level. And we start digging for that heart and digging into the deep stuff that's been going on. And then we kind of go back up and then send them out on the last day at 30,000 feet again with tools and just a whole new perspective on life, but especially tools to now be able to go out and re-engage their families, re-engage their world from a healthy place where they're living from their heart. That's probably one of in a nutshell, the best way to describe what we do.
So go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say, just correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the process for you're a facilitator of this as well as being on the social media side of this. But in order to be a facilitator, you also have to first have gone through the program as well, right?
Absolutely.
So you've gone through this program, not just at the facilitator level, but as the participant level, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's two things to be a facilitator. Number one, to get in the program in the first place, you have to either be military, current military veteran, law enforcement, first responder. That's kind of our number one thing. Some civilians get to come through. So we always encourage people, hey, get on there. If you're hurting and you can come check it out, but that's kind of a special occasion that will allow some of them to come through. So that's kind of the first thing, is that typically the team is all veterans. Right now, our entire team is veterans. And then we all had to go through the program first. And so this is kind of a thing that you see in the military. Like, we don't want to ever ask somebody to do something that we haven't first done ourselves. So the process that we ask these guys to come through, we've all sat in that couch in these sessions and in this, all the levels of what we go through ourselves first. And for me, it was completely life-changing. I grew up in the church. I grew up doing all kinds of stuff, but I have never experienced the type of healing and literal life change that I did once I went through a drop zone. It completely changed the course of my life and really my understanding of who I am, my identity, and then how also to engage my family, my wife especially, and stuff moving forward.
So there, at the crux of most everything that you were talking about was this concept of healing the individual's heart. Mm-hmm. Really diving in and getting there.
Yeah.
So within the confines of the program, talk to us a little bit about what that means. How do you get down to somebody's heart to enable them to heal?
Right. Well, I think a lot of times, just in general in our society, like we don't even know what does that mean. Like when you talk about your heart, But from a biblical perspective, we look at the heart, not the four-chambered heart, but we're talking about the spiritual heart, which is, it's like the center of your emotions and your being, who you are, your dreams, your visions. If you think about it, when something's going really bad, you're dealing with a lot of stress, or maybe you're experiencing something incredibly painful in your life. What do you feel? You kind of feel that hard, painful feeling in your stomach, that sick feeling, that nausea in kind of your stomach. Well, that's kind of where that's your heart. That's the center of you that is feeling that. And we, in the military, we always say center mass is the target. We're aiming for center mass. Well, in our life, that's what ends up happening is, from a spiritual perspective, the enemy is coming after us and he's aiming right here. He's trying to get us to shut our heart down. And so a lot of guys will talk about, man, I feel like a robot. Like I have no emotions. I don't feel anymore. Those are a lot of the things you hear from guys that are coming into a situation like Operation Restored Warrior. They're at the place where they feel like, man, I can't engage my wife. I don't feel anymore. I don't even know how to engage her because I feel like everything's turned off. And that's because your heart shuts down after a while, whether it's trauma of, say, for example, we get a lot of rescue swimmers, Coast Guard rescue swimmers that have come through the program. Incredible men, just unbelievable, the stuff that they do. They're dealing with death all the time. They're pulling bodies out of boats. They're pulling bodies out of the water. They're doing CPR on guys that are literally, I don't know how crazy you want to get me to get, but like they're doing CPR on people where their CPR is causing blood to go all over them and vomit and stuff. Like they're experiencing traumatic things on a regular basis. Well, how do you deal with that? Often what we do is we just shut off our feelings. We just close it off. Yeah, exactly. We harden up. And so we end up shutting that down. And so what we have to do is open up. And we talk about this in our council, being vulnerable and transparent. There's a certain level when we're able to kind of crack our heart open and begin to talk about things that maybe we've never talked to anyone about. One of the things that's really common in Operation Restored Warrior is, you don't typically hear this in the public, but a lot of men have experienced sexual abuse throughout their life or in their childhood, and they never talk about it. I would say almost 50% of our average drop zones, those men have been sexually abused. Those are things you bury at a young age, and you bury it down and you hold it because of the shame. There's so much shame there. And so to be able to crack open and begin to dive into the deep stuff that you've had buried for some of these guys, 40, 50 years, they've been burying this thing out of shame. And you can't blame them. The way our society treats it, especially a man who's experienced some sort of sexual trauma, it's like, well, we don't, just tough it out, grit it out. So you bury it. And what that ends up doing is causing you to just shut down your heart. And so as a man, we need to be able to live from that heart. And so what we do is, first of all, we create an environment by being vulnerable ourselves as a team, sharing pieces of our own story to create a safe environment where those guys can feel like they can share those deep things and begin to expose. And it's kind of like ripping a scab off something. It's like, ooh, you can feel again. You start feeling all these things, and it requires diving through some pain, of course, to do that. And there's obviously lots of counseling type programs as well that'll dive into there. But then from a spiritual perspective, ultimately, my belief is that Jesus is the one who can provide that healing, truly the lasting healing that they need. And so as they begin to open up, then Jesus can come in there and take that place where they're releasing this stuff, and he can heal it completely. And I've witnessed it over and over and over again, where guys who come in at the beginning, just like literally just like this, and like a darkness over them, darkness in their eyes, by the time they're leaving on that Monday morning, they're in a completely different place, full of joy, and just literally sometimes their skin complexion literally changes. It's incredible.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I thought while you were talking about that, there was something that I couldn't help but shake. This idea of opening that heart up, kind of exposing yourself to vulnerability. And you think so much of men in general, societally, we've been conditioned to think that we have to handle things ourselves. We have to cover that up. We have to create this tough facade.
Right.
And oftentimes that creates these layers of dysfunction, if you will, simply because you're too scared to express yourself or to expose that vulnerability. So what you guys are doing, that in and of itself is an incredible act of service, is helping a man rediscover himself at his very core.
Yeah. Well, and to each of us that's on the team, for us, it's like if we were able to receive this incredible thing ourselves, how could we not turn around and then try to help our brothers and sisters that are struggling as well? Because it's like, again, it literally changed my life. And so once about 6-8 months later, when they said, hey, we're interested in bringing people on as facilitators, it's like, oh, yeah, of course I want to try to be a part of this team. And it's a pretty strict process to get into the team. But once you get in, it's a privilege. It truly is a privilege because, yeah, I'm gone for 5 to 7 days every month. My family misses me and I'm very engaged. So it's difficult for me to even communicate with my family when I'm there. But to be able to go and see guys literally, like some of these men have literally had a gun in their mouth days before they came there, to then see them leaving with purpose and identity and joy, wouldn't trade that for anything. And so ultimately, I feel like it's these layers of service. I'm serving the military community, the law enforcement community, first responders, these people who have selflessly put themselves on the line and taken all kinds of hits for it. And from a spiritual perspective, I'm also serving my God, what I feel like is my call on my life and my purpose, and getting to fulfill that. I mean, the fulfillment that comes out of that it's unmatched.
Is ORW strictly a men's organization, or do they have a female portion to it too? Just I know we've only spoken about the men's side of it, but
so there is a women's program. So we used to do in-person women's drop zones as well. We ran that for a while, and actually my wife was able to go through. A few of the other facilitators' wives were able to go, and the original idea was women veterans and spouses, because we all know not only do military members themselves sacrifice a lot, but the spouses often sacrifice even more. Just while their spouse is gone on deployments and things like that, and what they go through when these guys come back, especially like the wives, when the men come back and they're just raging because they don't know what to do with all this stuff. So we started doing that. We currently are not running an in-person program. We've actually created an online program that's going to be releasing really soon. I've seen the videos. I've seen everything. It's incredible. It's really good. And we have an online men's program that's also going to be coming out, just so we can reach more people as part of it through the online avenue. But then, yeah, so we have women's, and for a time we were actually doing NFL drop zones as well. We had some funding that was specifically towards a lot of NFL guys deal with the same thing. Their life is focused on NFL. They're taking a beating physically, and then all of a sudden one day it ends, and they lose their purpose and struggle with a lot of the same things as military guys. So we did run that for a while as well. Neither of those are really officially running right now. We'd love to get it running again in the future, but yeah, it's pretty tremendous for the women's program as well.
That's cool. So here's a question I have for you regarding this entire thing. You had mentioned that oftentimes we're talking about men who have a gun in their mouth. What is the impetus to get these men to ORW? Because oftentimes when you're at that stage of your life, it's very hard to get recognition that you need help or something needs to change. You almost feel hopeless at that point. So what has helped these men get to that stage where they're coming to these drop zones?
That's a really good question. So I would say there's two things. Number one, again, from a spiritual perspective, I feel like God is always giving us a chance. God is always pursuing us and trying to, if any of the listeners are familiar with the parable of the prodigal son, the father is looking, his son leaves, and the father is looking out to the fields, and he's watching. And when his son finally comes, he goes running out to meet him, which in those days was incredibly weird. You didn't run anywhere. That was considered dishonoring, to go running after somebody. That picture, I feel like God is constantly, like a good father, pursuing everyone. And so I feel like there's a spiritual piece there where some of these guys are really hopeless, and then he brings them across some of the ways people have heard of ORW. Like, we don't have TV commercials, we don't have radio commercials. We've had guys say, "Oh yeah, I heard about you guys on the TV commercial." And we're like, we don't have TV commercials. Like, I saw it. There was a commercial and it told me to go there. You can't explain that other than God literally dropping that on them and bringing them there. Radio commercials, TV commercials. Sometimes it's that they just randomly meet somebody, and there's something about a person who lives from their heart. And so somebody who's gone through a drop zone and they're living from their heart, they're living authentically in their full identity. There's something that draws people to you when you live like that. And so they'll bump into somebody and just be like, huh, that was different. I'm kind of interested in that. And that'll draw them in enough to where a lot of times those guys, it's like their last ditch effort. They're like, well, I'll give this a shot. And if this doesn't work, that's it. And there's guys who've come in and literally explained to us their whole plan that they originally had for if it didn't help them, what they were going to do when they went home, when they left the place, or maybe they had a gun in the car. And when they left, they were going to take care of business then. It's pretty common. And so you see also, again, from a spiritual perspective, guys are literally, they're pulling the gun, even though they're already applied, they're scheduled to come to the program and they're getting ready to do it. And all of a sudden, somebody will just get this urge, like, I need to call them. And they'll get a phone call as they're sitting there getting ready to do that. And they're like, oh, that's kind of weird. And they answer, hey, man, I'm excited to see you at the drop zone. Like, how are you doing? And they're just like, oh, I can't do it. I got to go. And so I think God is looking out for these men all the time and women and get them there because he knows what's there for them. And there's a certain level of opposition that comes against them from a spiritual perspective. Guys getting sick, weird stuff happen at home, travel difficulties, because one of the things we really teach at ORW that's kind of a worldview is that we live in a world at war. There's good, there's evil, they're fighting. And we're caught up in the midst of this larger story. That's why so many movies and stories of a larger story resonate with us, because that's literally the world we're living in. And so you see that some of these guys do drop last minute. They'll drop last minute. They just get cold feet, whatever. They're scared, they're nervous. But ultimately, often it's a phone call here or a last ditch effort kind of a mindset that they end up having that gets them to finally make it.
It's really great stuff. I mean, it's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the power of service in your life outside of ORW. I mean, obviously ORW is a big part of it, right? But
Mm-hmm.
Where have you seen the power of service affect you personally, in that kind of thing?
Yeah. So it's interesting because at a young age, I had that drive to join the military, this idea of serving my country. And I had a couple things that threw me off. I was going to go delayed entry and I didn't. And so I didn't end up joining the military. And I think there's kind of two routes we take as men. We tend to either be really outward focused or incredibly inward focused.
Right.
And so a lot of times we end up in this really selfish, like, I'm all this, it's all about the money, my career, things like that. And for me, I ended up getting married at 19. I didn't have a lot of time to decide if I wanted to, pursue career instead of marriage and things like that. Had kids right away. But even in that, because of my immaturity and my instability, lack of identity, I was very selfish. And so I could say, well, I'm really selfless and I'm serving by focusing on my kids and providing for them and all these things. But the reality is I was doing it. So Brad, you talked about No More Mr. Nice Guy. I can't remember which episode it was. Book changed my life. I was a nice guy. And so even in service, it was for me.
Yep.
And so it wasn't until I was able to break free from that and really actually look at like selfless service, actually putting others ahead of myself, which I believe is part of being an authentic man. Now, like my understanding of that is part of being a man is to serve others. It's changed my life dramatically because number one, my relationships have changed. When I began to view my wife and my kids as something that I am called to do as a good man, as an authentic man, I'm supposed to serve them from a selfless perspective where I put their needs ahead of mine. My relationships completely changed because suddenly they're seeing that I'm giving, I'm taking less and I'm giving more. As men, we tend to absorb from others. That's like the other option. We're pulling like our wives. We want our wives to speak identity into us. We want our wives, tell me I'm a good husband. Tell me I'm a good man. All these things. When that shifts and we begin to serve them and go after their hearts, not just their bodies, there's something that changes in that. It's like, wow, like you're actually serving me and it's not for something. I'm not doing it to get something. It's just I'm offering from my strength. Changes everything. And it has changed everything. And I've had a rough go at we don't have time to get into it, but my marriage has been interesting, to say the least. A lot of damage and a lot of pain back and forth. And yet when I'm able to serve her, it has drastically changed my marriage, because I'm not going to her for something. I'm going to her to offer. And so I would challenge your listeners, service. What does that look like for you in your marriage, in your family, to be able to offer strength instead of looking to receive anything? Offering strength without, it just changes everything, because you're no longer going to get, you're just offering. And then that begins to bleed out into your community, into whatever else you're doing. So for me, I joined the military, obviously, but in ministry, at church, things like that, when I began to put myself out there and to begin to engage the world to help, to serve. However, when I first started doing stuff at church, I wasn't doing anything cool like ORW. I was like, helping with sound system for worship or doing whatever. But when you begin to prioritize other things and service in general, I just feel like there's a shift that happens. And also, if you're leading on any kind of level, there's a level of accountability there too. When I began serving in men's ministry at my church, people started looking up to me, and you can either live a double life and be one way at church and another way at home, or you can get out there, be speaking truth and leading others and serving others, and then allow that to be like, hey, these people expect me to actually walk this out. So there's a level of accountability that came with it too, that really began to empower me, like, hey, like, I need to walk this out. I need to live this if I'm going to be out here serving people and helping people in these areas. So it's been pretty dramatic. I mean, the military is a great example. Obviously, as a guardsman so far, I haven't done anything super impactful. I got called out to the riots, got to serve my community for the riots when I was in Washington and the Seattle area. I get called out for fires to help out. And there's just something in a man that comes alive when he's serving. I guess that's the best way to describe it. There's something that's what we're created to do. And so there's just like this empowerment and life that comes out of that. Even if it's, I'm going to spend 2 weeks on a fire line, that's not like drastically impacting the world, but there's something in me that comes alive and like, I'm serving my community. So it's helped a lot in that way.
As you were coming back to the concept of being a nice guy or a recovering nice guy, there's this incredible dichotomy behind the idea of serving somebody, giving to get, the covert contracts, whatever you want to call that. It's this idea of, I'm going to do this for you, expecting X in return. Yeah. And this expectation is unspoken. I know, based on the way that you presented that and the way in which you were talking, that you have felt that extreme difference when you're doing that kind of service, over which I put air quotes, because you're not really serving somebody else.
No.
When you're expecting something in return, against truly serving others. Like that difference is palpable. When you're doing something for yours, like genuinely, sincerely for other people, like it's an unmatched feeling. Like you said, it's what men are called to do. Like, and everyone around you knows too. That's the thing. Yeah. Like your wife knows when you're serving her to get laid versus when you're serving her because you care about her heart. Like that's the bottom line. And you're going to get that reaction out of her. And I think it's so easy for us to get into a pattern where, as men, we can kind of try to control our environment, try to control and manipulate things. And so we are just we're serving, sure, but with this idea of what am I going to get back in return? What am I going to get back? And I mean, and that could even be something like military. I'm just joining the Guard for the benefits. I don't really care about serving my country, and I'm not like a lot of people do join the Guard to get the college benefits and stuff. But I think that's at the heart of service is not only are you serving at all, or are you sitting on the couch playing Xbox, but then number two, like, why are you serving? What is the reason behind it? Because if you're serving to get something, probably not going to have that much of an impact. No, I mean, you nailed it. It's when you can look inside yourself and realize that I'm doing this because I want to. That's when your heart has changed. That's when you're doing that for the right reasons. And by so doing, you're also opening yourself up for a world of opportunity. I mean, I think of you in ORW, and the lives that you've been able to positively change. You're going to cross paths with some of these men in the future, and they're probably just going to come up to you and hug you. Like you think of the experience of Christ walking the streets of Galilee, and people would fall at his feet just to thank him for being him.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself is service. I think when we talked about it, I likened it unto a Christ-like attribute. You serve others, you're acting like Christ in your behavior, in your actions. And to those people, in some capacity, you're always going to be some semblance of a savior to them, simply because you chose to pour your heart into them and serve them.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
I used to hear a pastor always say that. He's like, you may be the only example of Jesus that people are getting. Think about how you're portraying that. And certainly that's part of how we approach ORW is, I mean, as men, it's easy to take things and, it kind of goes back to that vulnerability piece we were talking about earlier too. You can have the bravado piece. Jesus he's the Lion of Judah. He's aggressive. He's a man's man. He flipped giant marble stone tables. When people think about him going to the temple and throwing tables and made a whip and all this, like these are not little like Samsonite plastic tables that we use at church. These are like stone. Like he was a man. He worked with his hands. That's what he grew up doing. There's both sides to that. And so for us to try to portray that in being vulnerable, there's a softness and a tenderness that I can cry with another man as he shares deep pain that he's been through. But then, I can also rear up with ferocity when somebody tries to come after my family. That's part of being a man is those things. And I think also be an example of who Jesus was. He was ferocious. He was fierce when fierceness was required, but then tender and loving. And that's that dichotomy of, engaging your wife and your kids. And like my little girls, I look at my little girls, like I love them and I have to be tender with them and I can't just yell at them. My 14-year-old boy. Yeah. Sometimes he needs me to be rough with them. But that I think is how we best serve, is not only being willing to be selfless, but also knowing like when is what needed. Like being able to wield a sword and wave it around doesn't make me a warrior. When should I use that sword? That's ultimately a good warrior knows when to use that sword. And so being able to kind of transition between these different ideas is really important.
Well, right. It comes down to how you serve, right? Like you serve others in the way that they need to be served. So like you said, I have daughters as well. I don't have sons, but I can imagine that I would treat my sons much differently than I would treat my daughters.
Yeah.
In certain situations, because they are different, in a different way than I would treat my wife necessarily in a similar situation. You serve to the value of the person you're serving as opposed to value yourself.
Yeah.
It's not to say that you don't necessarily get something out of it, but you don't do that service to get that thing out of it. Which is it's the weird, Brad and I kind of talked about it in our previous episode. Is I made a comment along the lines of just talking about the service I've done in the past almost cheapens it to me, because I'm talking about something that I've done to serve somebody else, as almost feeling like I'm bragging about it or promoting it. Whereas it was literally done with no self-interest. It was literally just to provide a service to somebody else.
Yes.
And you have to understand also how to communicate to that person and how to serve that person to themselves. And
how fulfilled did you feel after too? Probably immensely.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that's
when
huge.
You do it with full selfishness, with no expectation of return, with no covert contract, with no, expectation of tit for tat. The feeling of inner joy that it brings you is immense. It's undescribable almost. And when you truly do it with no other purpose than to provide a service for someone else, it's one of the most purest forms of joy that I think I've felt in life.
Yeah. There's just something, we were designed for that. I just feel like we were designed. And so when you begin to walk in that, there's just nothing that meets that like fulfillment more, because you're truly meeting somebody's need in that moment. I mean, we all have experienced those levels of like, hey, I'm going to go help feed the poor for a night or something, like the missions and stuff downtown where they're serving food or something. And you go do that and you just feel, man, I feel good. Like that's what kind of draws us back to that. It's like, man, I just feel so good. Like I'm doing this service. But part of that is the fact that that's that selfless service. That's just, there's something it meets in our hearts. And I'm going to say our hearts, like that is a heart level thing. When you're living from your heart, like that's how you can engage those things. I'm thinking of a quote. I just pulled it up here. I want to read this quote. This is making me think of this. It's Howard Thurman. It says, don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive and go do that. Because what the world needs are men who have come alive. And I think that really speaks to, you can go do service to do service. You can go do service to get things back in return, to look good, even, I would say. But to find that thing that's like from here, that makes you come alive, that's that selfless service, that call, that purpose. And we have to have that as men. We have to have that purpose. And people respond to that. People, like the way people respond to a man who's come alive and is operating in his identity and his purpose, it's totally different. That's why certain people resonate to us too, more than others, because we can tell it's like genuine.
So I have a question kind of along those lines, right? We obviously the podcast is Untaming Masculinity. So we like to tie this back to masculinity. There's a lot of ways that people can serve people, right? As a man, do you believe, or can you give examples of things that, or ways of service that men in particular can provide service to communities, to family, to organizations, etc.? I want to get your thoughts on it, because I feel like there are ways that men can serve specifically, but I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So one of the biggest actual epidemics in our country right now is fatherlessness. We are experiencing fatherlessness at such a degree in our nation. I believe that is at the root of almost everything we're facing as a country. If we were to actually dive into fatherlessness and start dealing with that, we would solve so many of the problems in the world, but certainly our country. I think the best way that a man can serve, number one, is by finding younger men and fathering them. There are so many younger men out there that, they don't have a father in their life, or maybe they have a father that's there, but he's not there. He's not emotionally engaged. He's not teaching them anything. He's gone all the time. A lot of us, we can look back at our own childhood and we can see that was our experience, is that our father may have been there, but he was busy working, or maybe it was a little more extreme. Maybe he was, partying and running around and stuff. And so we just didn't get what we needed from him. And so as a man, to be able to go and engage younger men, and, masculinity bestows masculinity. A woman cannot bestow masculinity upon a man. Like that is something that has to be given from another man. We want to be summoned into manhood, summoned as a man. And so that requires men who are willing to go selflessly serve. Hey, man, I want to bring you along while I go, play ball with my boy, or I want to bring you along while we go serve somebody. And I'm going to show you what it means to be a man. Bringing young guys along, and, you think of like a youth group or something like that, group of young guys. Hey, we're going to go build a fence for Mrs. So-and-so who can't handle it because she's too old or whatever it is. Not only are you fathering those men, you're also providing a service to this lady by providing a service. Maybe it's working on a car, maybe it's doing that thing, but you're fathering men and inviting them into what does it mean to be a man? Because the reality is, most of us, we're learning our idea of manhood based off of what's been displayed for us. And so I think that's one of the biggest ways we can serve in our communities, is by, number one, being an example of an authentic man, vulnerable, fierce, trained, prepared, and then inviting other men. And sometimes we father men that aren't that much younger than us. Sometimes I have been fathered by men that are basically peers in my life, where they have walked me through difficult times in my life, or fathered me. Hey, my dad didn't show me how to do finances and stuff, so I've got another man who's going to father me through that. Spreadsheets. I need a man to father me through spreadsheets.
I know a guy.
but like, no joke. Like that's something we need as men to speak into our life. And so I think that's one of the first ways. And that can really tie into things like, what are some things men are usually good at? Working with their hands, whether it's on cars, whether it's on projects in yards and things like that. And we can get out there and do things like that in our community without any expectation of getting something back in return. No, I'm going to help you with this thing that you need just because I know you need it and I can offer it. And I think that's part of being a man. And we offer out of a place of strength. I'm going to offer this to you, no expectation. And I'll be honest, people don't know what to do with that most of the time. I would say especially women don't know what to do with that because women are used to sort of being able to control us to some degree by like getting us to, we'll do anything to make them happy. And so they feel like they can kind of control us or manipulate us by like drawing us in, and then we'll do whatever they want. But when a man can stand in strength, hey, I'm going to offer this thing to you. I don't expect anything in return. It's like mind boggling for a lot of women. It's like, whoa, you don't? Like, even if it's our wife. And so, but I think that's a big piece of the community is number one, the fatherlessness issue is just huge. And then you can bring those guys along to then begin, stepping into practical things that need to be done in the community. And that's not even getting into things like law enforcement or martial arts or things where you can really truly be serving and like training into something very, even more specific or saving people literally as far as like law enforcement and things like that.
I love that concept of masculinity bestows masculinity. I think that's such a strong statement, and it's so true. And the best part about that, and I think we see it, with our involvement in the Iron Council in general, is that you can be a giver and a receiver within the same community, right?
Yeah.
Right. You if you surround yourself with masculine men, there are going to be people who excel at certain parts where you are deficient and vice versa.
Yep.
And you can trade that, and that selfishness, that service to others will become almost a natural thing to raise all boats almost, kind of concept.
Yeah. It's incredible. I mean, I just think that we get this concept that, hey, you become a man when you're 18. Become a man when you're 21. You become a man the first time you get laid. Like, we don't really know. We each have our own variation of what we think it means to become a man. In the military, it's like, hey, you're not a man until you go deploy and shoot somebody or something. Like, there's all these layers and levels depending on how you're raised. A bunch of fatherless young men that end up joining a gang. Hey, you're a man when you get out there and do this thing to somebody, and then you're initiated into the gang. Like, these are the kinds of things. Well, the design was for us to be initiated into manhood by men.
Yeah.
They were supposed to walk us into that.
It's especially true in our culture, in the American culture. There is no evolution into manhood process, right? Native Americans had a process. Other cultures have processes where this is where you become a man. This is where you go out and do your quest, and you go through whatever trials and tribulations, and you become a man. There is nothing like that in our modern culture, and I think you're right. A lot of it has to do with fathering children. Even fathers that are a part of the family sometimes aren't necessarily involved in raising men and raising manhood and serving their children.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Before the Industrial Revolution, what did boys do? They were raised by their fathers. They learned their father's trade. So as soon as they were old enough, they started going with dad to work and learning his trade. They spent all day with dad. That's how they learned what it was to be a man, was just by being around men, doing man things. And then you get into the Industrial Revolution, and all of a sudden dad's like going off to work while the boys left at home with mom. And that's just kind of become what we're used to now as a society is basically men are supposed to be getting raised by women. And don't get me wrong, there are some single moms who have done incredible work to try to raise their sons in the midst of, difficult circumstances because of a man abandoning them, or maybe, even worse, like the father died or something like that. And so I don't mean to put down women that are trying to raise boys, but the reality is they need to get those boys around men, other men, in order to truly be able to get them in there, because that's what we need is examples. And that's something I'm starting to do with my son now is I'm trying to find ways to incorporate him into what I'm already doing instead of just like one-on-one, like, hey, we're going to just go do this fun thing that you want to do, which is like more of a boy thing. I'm just going to bring you along while I go do a man thing. And you're just going to see how it works. You're going to see how me and my friends operate, because then he's experiencing, okay, this is what manhood looks like. This is how they treat each other. And the Iron Council, he's listened to, I take him to school on Friday mornings and we'll have the team calls, and it's kind of during my taking him to school, and he's listening and he's absorbing and he's listening to how we all treat each other, how we all talk to each other. And he's listened to different podcasts and things with me. And he's starting to get this idea like, okay, this is how men operate. And that's what we need. And that's how it used to be.
Therapy of sorts.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess this is a good segue into how do guys listening to this get in touch with ORW or you? Where to go?
Yeah. So Operation Restored Warrior, best way to find us is just go to our website, www.operationrestoredwarrior.org. From there, first of all, you'll find two things. So we are a nonprofit and we run completely off of donations. So there's two ways you can help. Number one, obviously, if you're a veteran, a first responder, a law enforcement officer, and you are struggling, there's literally, get on the homepage, there's two tabs, huge white tabs. One is I'm a veteran. That's where you click if you're interested in applying to attend a drop zone. And literally within a few days, you'll get a call from Tim, our onboarding guy, and he'll reach out to you. Then there's another tab that says, I want to support. And so if you feel like, man, this sounds like something I'd want to support, I encourage you, click on that one. There's a few different ways that you can support us. We need support. We're running guys through all the time. It is no cost to the guys coming. So as a result, in order to make it accessible for guys where they don't have to pay to come, we need support. So that's one way to check it out. We're on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. You can find our YouTube channels, tons of great videos, not only of our podcast that we have, the Operation Restored Warrior podcast. I'm the host. We're just getting rolling. It's good stuff. We talk about kind of what we do at drop zones, and then we talk about also just kind of how to walk out the things that we teach in the drop zones. So the Operation Restored Warrior podcast, we're on all the major platforms. But then also YouTube, you'll see the videos of testimonies, guys just talking about how it was for them. And so if you're kind of waffling on it, like, man, this sounds really interesting. I'm a veteran. I'm kind of struggling. Go watch some videos. Go check it out. See what you think. You'll hear the guys talking about how it was for them. That's also on our website. You'll find connections there. And as far as me, official David Body, you find me on Instagram, fairly active there, and you can follow me there. But I honestly, the main thing I would just say is go to ORW. If this resonates with you, it's probably resonating with you for one of two reasons. Either you're like a family member or you have friends that are veterans and you are concerned about the suicide issue that we have with our veterans. And in that case, hey, go follow us, share our stuff so that you can encourage others to come check it out and consider supporting. And then number two, it might be resonating with you because you're in that place and you're struggling. Go check us out and apply. Love to have you. It'll truly change your life.
Awesome, man. This has been an incredible conversation. Like, I got chills at least once. So thank you for sharing that.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I really appreciate you joining us, David. I mean, obviously you, Brad, and I are friends and we have a long history together, but I appreciate you coming on and telling us about ORW and sharing your thoughts on service. It's been a great episode. If folks want to follow us, please join us on untamingmasculinity.com. You'll find all of our social media accounts there. We've been most active on Instagram and Twitter to a lesser extent. You'll find links to our YouTube channel where you can find these podcasts as well as links to the actual podcast itself. You can find us on all of the major podcast networks, and we really appreciate if you leave us a rating and review. We will include all of David's contact information in the show notes, so be sure to check us out there. Otherwise, I look forward to talking to you guys next week. I appreciate it. Have a good weekend.